Hello, and welcome to this WTTW community screening. We hope you've enjoyed the fascinating documentary of Jonathan Scott's Power Trip, an independent lens pop-up film. And it's my pleasure to host this post-screening discussion with a panel of expert women who will all have something to share. I'm Sylvia Ewing, and I'm delighted to have you here this evening. Joining me are individuals who have worked on environmental sustainability, renewable energy, and climate change, women that I admire and like to call friends. Erika Allen is with Urban Growers Collective, and she can also share recent news about being a recipient of the Pritzker Prize with her partners. Margaret Garascia is with Elevate Engergy. She is an expert in so many things. You're going to learn about electrification, and Margaret's the one to tell you about it. And Tonyisha Harris is with the Illinois Environmental Council and has been an activist on the climate change space for a while. So if you are watching us, this is how we can give applause in Zoom land. I'm giving them all a big applause, and I thank them and you for joining. This is a documentary that was very passionate. It was a personal project, and we got to witness the host, Jonathan Scott, with his journey as his eyes were opened. He was surprised and angry when he heard a number of things. He went from talking about faith leaders and people like Mark Ruffalo and Bernie Sanders and utilities in Nevada and Florida, South Carolina. And we saw a different version of this property brother on PBS. And it was truly a wide-ranging trip that shared triumph and tragedy. There was one person in the documentary who died from black lung, and it was mentioned in the piece. But to my panelists, and this is really to all of you, Scott was surprised when he heard that that's the way it's always been done response. Were you surprised? And how do we combat that attitude as we work on climate solutions? And I'm going to come to you first, Tonyisha.
Well, I want to say I'm happy to be here with such amazing women, and I'm very happy to be invited and represent youth climate activists all across the nation or even outside of it. I would say his question, business as usual has been combated by the COVID-19 pandemic, which has shown that that is no longer the status quo, the model we should follow. Just because it's something that's been done for years does not mean it's perfect, it does not mean it's not flawed, and does not mean it needs to continue. And I think that's what the youth climate movement is showing, where we are more equitable and inclusive than our predecessor in the usual environmental movement, but we are taking a mantle. We are using our voices to enact change, and change is exactly what is necessary to address the issues such as solar energy or energy sovereignty in the film itself, but also just in addressing the climate crisis. We cannot do the same things because that's what got us in the situation in the first place. So he should be angry when he heard that's how it's done, because that is incorrect.
Thank you. And right out the bat, young people speaking up. I'm going to go in order on my screen and ask you the same question, Margaret. Were you surprised, and how do we combat that attitude?
Yeah, thanks, Sylvia. Also, just such an honor to be here with the amazing panel. And, I think I'd echo what Tonyisha said. I think not surprising to hear that, but I think everyone here in their careers, but also probably their personal lives, is a testament to changing the status quo, right? When you're in a space where people don't look like you or don't think like you. So I think it's always tough to change the status quo, especially when there are such powerful and entrenched interests, right? Kind of working against you. But I think we all know and can share examples of when we work together to change that we really can. So I think not surprising to hear that, but understanding and sobering to know kind of what we're up against in the fight against climate change.
Thank you. And we're up against a lot. Erika, I know you don't take no for an answer often, but what do you think?
Yeah, that really struck me. I kind of had the same response that he did, and great to be here. And I'm so excited for getting into this conversation. What struck me was that it was said by an official from Duke Energy in North Carolina, right on the heels of Nelson and Joyce Johnson, who, you know, kind of spearheaded, and I actually have met and know personally. So I was just kind of like really taken aback by that comment. And then knowing that they went through a whole truth and reconciliation process around the murders of their dear friends and really brought the whole community of Greensboro together to reconcile with the structural racism and the lynching that has happened there historically. And I heard that resonated with me. It's, you know, I think it's really important to draw a distinction between, not a distinction, but a connection between structural racism and climate change. And to hear those tropes, to hear that kind of justification for not moving into this next direction is unacceptable. And, but unfortunately, kind of acceptable. And so to see him kind of being in it and passionate about his mission, respond in a way that many of us kind of respond within our heads when we hear that, because we know what it means. We know it's the tip of the iceberg about a whole bunch of other things that kind of are companions of, you know, climate degradation and putting profits before humanity and nature. It was really powerful.
Well, thank you. And I guess messengers are always important. It does take all of us, because as a Black woman, I have heard that. And as Margaret said, we've all heard it in our careers, but the blatant, the comfort in being so public and blatant and on camera was very chilling. Another kind of chilling cameo was the outgoing president, who's a fan of coal. What policy changes would you like to see in a new administration? Because, you know, that famous quote about coal is coming back was one that was captured in this piece. We know where we are now. We think we know where we are now, headed into a future where climate change will be addressed more seriously. But what would you like to see in terms of policies? Give me one or two, and I'll stay with you, Erika, on that.
I think the first thing that always comes to mind, and that we lead with compassion and empathy, is how do we transition from coal? So I look at some of those towns where folks are literally dying from their profession, and the gentleman who was was asked about, would you encourage your children to enter into this profession? And he had, kind of had the automatic, and then he pulled back and he was like, no, I got to tell the truth, no. And I really see that as a significant policy opportunity to really incentivize and fund this transition so that new jobs can be created. I mean, climate change is the new economy. I mean, we don't have a choice. So being able to begin moving and have really strong transition plans and educating this next generation to understand that is really important. So that to me is funding that and actually creating a pathway so folks can see themselves in this new economy.
I want to pick up on that because I think that Tonyisha is involved in some work where people do reflect on the kindness or reflect on, you can't just leave a town hanging without a path forward, particularly when companies say, well, we're done and leave. Tonyisha, how would you respond both to the coal transition and then the original question about any policy changes you'd like to see from the president-elect and vice president-elect's administration?
Yeah, I want to say that coal is a dying industry and that it's not returning. And so while that's a hard pill to swallow, especially for the communities that have relied on this as income for years, it's not coming back. But what you don't hear is what Erika was alluding to is a just transition plan to help those communities who relied on coal power plants for income, healthcare, pension, funding even their schools. You don't hear anyone talking about a just transition fund. So in Illinois, I'm working on the Clean Energy Jobs Act, and we're trying to get it passed, which includes a just transition plan, not just for coal communities who have a coal power plant that's shuttering, 4 of which have shuttered in Illinois thus far, but also for other communities who have borne the brunt of pollutions from these dirty energy sources with none of the benefits. So like an environmental justice community like South Shore, which is where I'm from, dealing with all the air pollution and the harmful health effects of living near industries, but never benefiting from even having the jobs or the funding going into school systems. And so when I'm thinking about the new administration coming in and the type of policies I want to see, I want to see a transition from all fossil fuel energy to renewable energy. I want to see RPS, or the renewable portfolio standards, increasing. I want to see us addressing climate change in an equitable manner. So making sure every community throughout the US, like we're trying to do in Illinois, can participate in this new clean energy economy. And we tackle the jobs and the public health issue, but the also ever increasing climate crisis issue.
Well, thank you. Very well said. Margaret, what about you? What do you want to see on the policy front and also on what's been said thus far?
Yeah, I think I'd pick up that thread and I'd want to see the administration draw that direct line between environmental justice and clean energy investments, right? So I think here in Illinois, we can be really proud of Illinois Solar for All, which directs solar investments in environmental justice communities, right? And so I think the vacuum that we've seen the past 4 years on climate leadership, many states and cities have stepped up into that void. So I think the new administration has a lot to learn from what states and cities and tribal nations have been doing these past 4 years and how those connections are being made. And I think I just say one quick thing about coal is that I think it's used almost rhetorically now, right? To evoke this nostalgia for what once was. I mean, talk about the status quo. So I'd like to see a sketch and a vision for the future, right? Stop talking about the past, but how much cleaner, are our homes going to be when we stop burning fossil fuels at home? Our communities, when we get rid of smog from, buses and things like that. So I'd like to hear that positive messaging about what we can all expect from the clean energy transition.
Thank you. That's really fascinating. And that's partially what you can expect from this conversation. If you're just joining us, we've seen a screening of Jonathan Scott's Power Trip, which is a deep interrogation about the obstacles across the country for achieving clean and renewable energy. And I'm joined here by 3 exceptional guests: Tonyisha Harris of the Illinois Environmental Council and a climate activist, Erika Allen of Urban Growers Collective and doing work in Auburn Gresham, and Margaret Garascia of Elevate Energy, and all have a lot to share. This show will be on Monday, November 16th at 10 p.m. Central to check it out. So I'm going to come back to you, Margaret. In South Carolina, the choice between paying utility bills and medicine was just heartbreaking, absolutely heartbreaking. Also, the place where that's how it's always been done came up. Talk about energy insecurity and energy burden, because for some people, this could be a surprise. But I know that in your research, that there's energy insecurity and other burdens that come from the utility costs all around the country. Talk a little bit about that, please.
Yeah, energy insecurity, I might have heard of housing insecurity or food insecurity. So that's really kind of the analogous term here when we talk about utility bills. It describes a state that folks can fall into and out of where keeping up with utility bills just becomes really challenging, right? They have to make trade-offs. As the folks in the documentary talked about, between medicine and paying for bills, or keeping up with rent and paying for utility bills. And unfortunately, it's a very common story all across the US. So here in Chicago, Elevate actually went out and did home visits. This was pre-pandemic, but we were invited into folks' homes who had applied for one of our programs to talk about some of these issues. And one of the things that was just most striking was, these were folks who owned their homes in Chicago. So they were homeowners, which that's the American dream, right? But they were still really struggling to keep up with those daily bills. They described the winter gas bill as just being this thing that they dreaded getting in the mail and having to keep up with. We heard from seniors who would, try to cut back on medications or certain necessities to be able to keep up. And I think something that folks maybe don't realize is that a lot of the assistance programs that are out there will really penalize you if you fall behind. So they knew that they had to like stay on their assistance program, right? So they had to make these sacrifices. And I think the pandemic has just underscored how tenuous, what a tenuous position so many people are in. We know that there are about 179 million Americans across the country right now who are at risk of utility shut off, because during the pandemic, moratoriums were passed such that utilities couldn't shut folks off for non-payment. And a lot of those have expired or about to expire. So unfortunately, energy insecurity is just a growing problem here in the US.
Thank you, Margaret. That's an overview of a sad situation, but to know is to act, right? So we're learning and growing here. Tonyisha, we saw a couple of elder statesmen. We saw Al Gore, and he looked different. And we saw Bernie Sanders as well. We're giving you the mic again on behalf of young people. Give us a snapshot, because we know Gore's sentiment and the really important work that he's done. We know how Bernie's carried, the torch. But what's going on in the youth climate action world these days?
Yeah, so the youth climate movement is ever growing and expanding. I think a really great example that most people might be familiar with is back in September 2019, where there were climate strikes all across the globe. And in Illinois, that had 12 counties in Illinois had youth climate strikes. And when we say young people, we're defining that as 26 and younger. I've led actions to Illinois' governor where we had second graders there. We even had a little kid there participating in these actions. And so the youth climate movement is picking up where, people like Al Gore or Bernie Sanders have really left off with bringing in that new energy and perspective. So I said earlier in my comments, we are more inclusive and equitable. And so you'll see a youth climate activist always talking about environmental justice, whether or not they are impacted in the same way. But you'll also see that people are listening. And unfortunately, we're moving past the messaging of fighting for our future to fighting for our present. When I think about my future, we have 9 years to get to carbon neutral before we hit a tipping point, and we can't reverse what's happening with the climate crisis. So that's not my future. 9 years is right now happening. And so we're transitioning to fighting for our present and just wanting to even think about what's life going to be about past 32. When Margaret was saying some of them were homeowners, I don't consider buying a home right now or any large long-term purchase, because climate anxiety is a real thing in this movement. What's the point? That's exactly what a lot of my fellow activists are saying. If our planet is going to become inhabitable, while during our lifetime, we don't see ourselves having the luxury of growing old or making big life decisions. And so we're foregoing some of them, like childbirth, like home ownership. But the youth climate movement is aiming to change that and encourage the decision makers, the people in power, like our new administration, to take action on climate that will secure our present and let us think about a future.
Thank you so much. And I want to think about some of the positives, and I think Erika will have that. But I'll take a minute as a straight up boomer to apologize. I never missed the opportunity to say sorry for all the stuff that we did. There's a little sorry, not sorry, because the 70s were fun. But in all seriousness, we have to work together, because if we wait for you to get the job or to be at an age where, you have the stability or the platform to make change, it's going to be too late. So we really have to work across all ages to make this happen. But Erika, there was some fascinating examples from the Navajo Nation of taking matters into their own hands to change their future and to own their present. Very powerful examples. And I'm thrilled that you are part of work that is powerful right here in Illinois and in Chicago in the WTTW viewing area. I'd like you to talk first about the overall project in Auburn Gresham, and then to talk specifically about.
Thank you. So I'm still overwhelmed by the comments, because I think it is something that I'm very conscious of, and our team with the work that we're doing in Auburn Gresham is conscious of of connecting the generations. So I like this concept that I carry with me a lot. And I think it resonated with me to hear about how the Navajo people are connecting their past with their future. And this idea of Sankofa, you have to look back to move forward, and we're in the present. And that's really a powerful way to navigate and make decisions around what we prioritize. So for Urban Growers Collective's work, which is for me about a 20-year arc of the work that was established by Growing Power Chicago, Urban Growers Collective, and now Always Growing Auburn Gresham with our partner, the Greater Auburn Gresham Development Corporation, with their project, which is the Healthy Lifestyle Hub on 79th Street, the most trafficked bus line in the city, right? Most people going back and forth on that bus, and there is no full service medical provider for a whole community. First COVID death was in Auburn Gresham. So just the idea of the apartheid that we have in our city, just around, I work through the medium of food, but I'm an interdisciplinary person through the journey of food and trying to grow food, and to do that in an equitable way in a city that didn't really, even though our motto is city in a garden, that wasn't really like a thing back when I started, but I could see it and saw this land and opportunity to create really vibrant, environmentally just, balanced communities with food at the center. And that vision just grew as we developed projects and problem solved and kind of began putting all the pieces together. And it really led us to the need for an anaerobic digester. So the food brought us to the energy piece. And I saw that with the Navajo as well. It was like, we have the sun that's not just our source of energy, but it's also part of our spiritual center. There's so much connection there. And our project, the Green Era Project and the Urban Farm Campus, is bringing all those pieces together. This idea of recirculating wealth, recirculating energy. Food waste is a natural resource. It's carbon, nitrogen, water. It's these building blocks of life. If you can recirculate those elements in a community, you can build other systems on it. And then we're climate resilient, right? There's a superstorm that comes through. There's tornadoes that I keep kind of looking to the side eye because my windows are rattling because we have a tornado warning right now. That's not usual. We don't have consecutive 70-degree days in Chicago in November. Like, these are all signs, and we can be responsive and resilient while we're also creating and stopping the things that are elevating that, and we can shift into systems that not only problem solve a variety of issues simultaneously, but also generate income, generate wealth. And so I think that dispelling this notion that being environmentally responsible, addressing environmental racism, having just transition plans, really looking at how our utilities are not really working in our best interests and how they should, and asking those questions like, why is there only one utility company? Doesn't make sense. And I think that the more that we do that inquiry, and young people really do that inquiry and speak loudly about it, and have the kind of are willing to make some sacrifices to resolve this so that we can move forward. I think that's really what we're trying to do with the project in Auburn Gresham, is to really kickstart these catalytic developments that are healing from the public health perspective, and are also healing in the sense of creating alternative energy and food systems that don't exploit the earth, people, the environment, and really continue to return on the investment that is given on so many levels, tangible.
And that's a family legacy for you from your father as well. So Tonyisha and any young people listening, yep, it is a storm out there. I won't say what kind of storm, but there's a storm. But when we have these kinds of partnerships, there can be more possibilities, because the Auburn Gresham, that whole wellness corridor, there's the work that this long established community development corporation wants to do based on the ground up intel they have about what people want and need, you know, walkable businesses, things in your community for the mind, body, spirit. And then in partnership with, you know, the queen of agriculture and sustainability, but with your history and legacy and your giant machine that you want to create a campus for that actually distributes and handles the waste and brings all of the money back into the community. So I urge people to learn more about that. And you did get the Pritzker Prize for it. So very, very exciting. Any other thing that you wanted to add? I don't know what's the official name again of the collaboration?
It's called AG, or Always Growing Auburn Gresham, with the idea of perpetual energy, because it's really perpetual energy. And so I'm so excited for young people to come and see all of these pieces in our own community, not somewhere else, but in our community where we can see it and learn and grow and live within the context of understanding that banana peel shouldn't go in a pit somewhere far away, releasing methane into the atmosphere when it decomposes, but should be captured and used to create 1 million, you know, equivalent gallons of gasoline a year. That's what we'll be creating.
And what's the machine called again? It's
anaerobic. So think of aerobics, oxygen. Anaerobic is without oxygen, digester. So it's just a big metal digestive system that is breaking down, and all these microbes are eating the food waste. And the more calorie rich, the more energy, the more gas that's released, just like our systems, which is kind of gross.
You said the stinkier, the better. Well, I wanted people to have the official names and that information. Look it up. Keep your eye on this. This is the kind of thing that there's a friend of ours, Delmar Gillis at Elevate Energy, who says you should be able to see things outside your door, not just on television, you know. And so I love that you're bringing it into the community. You know, we're on a bit of a positive stretch, and I will want to wrap up with some of the benefits of solar energy, even though he mentioned as well some of the imperfections. But before I do, I just want to have a quick look at how we talk about all of these issues. Someone in the documentary said that that there was discussion outside the factual world, which resonated with me in so many ways about, you know, people spending millions on misinformation. And in fact, the solar referendum that we discussed in South Carolina, I think $60 million were spent. You know, Tonyisha, Margaret, how do you get around that? You know, as activists, Margaret, as a researcher and an innovator with lots of white papers, how do you combat the misinformation that exists that keeps people from their best interests? And Tonyisha, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I noticed that too in the documentary, and I was so sad that that happened. I would say one, having a really strong grassroots coalition is helpful. You know, communities trust organizations working in their communities and their community members, and having that information funneled through community-based organizations or faith leaders or whomever is active in the community. That's how you combat misinformation, by building a strong grassroots coalition that is credible and trustworthy and really in the areas that you're trying to outreach. So that's what we're doing for the Clean Energy Jobs Act. And we're also encountering our own tidbits of people with misinformation, but it's really thinking about what is your message, who are the right messengers, and using as many tools at your disposal to get that information out. Even though that was like question 3 was one of the most controversial things on the item, it's very possible people didn't even know about it until they got to the ballot. So what type of education are you doing long before people need to vote on it? How are you engaging with communities? How are you getting the information out there? Is it something that is understandable to the average person? So as a person with a STEM background, it's like science communication, but this could be policy communication. Are you explaining it in a way that people can understand? And so when they do see campaigns with misinformation, they're able to say like, oh, I know that's not true. That's where you should start.
Well, thank you. Margaret, I'm going to ask you the same question and segue into asking you to give us a layperson's overview of electrification. But because there's been some communication around that as well. So how do you get your research out there, and then talk to us about electrification?
Yeah. And I just agree with everything Tonyisha said. I mean, I think we have to continue to get our message and our research and our findings out there, right? To provide that positive vision that I was alluding to earlier. And I think electrification is a huge piece of that. So in order to meet our climate goals, we have to electrify everything, right? So I think folks probably know what an electric vehicle is, right? As opposed to an internal combustion engine. But we also have to electrify our buildings, right? We have to stop burning fossil fuels where we live, where we work, where we play. We have to electrify parts of industry as well. So like Erika, the type of digester that you're working on, these big kind of industrial processes, we have to figure out how to electrify them as well. The reason electrification matters is that it can be powered by things like solar, right? So Jonathan Scott was talking to people all across the country who were going solar and reducing, their electric load, all the things that currently use electricity in their house. But let's say they have something like a gas furnace at home. Their solar panels aren't going to do anything about that, right? So this electrification is really a piece of the puzzle, along with solar, along with things like dynamic rates and energy efficiency. And just one thing I'd add is that electrification is efficiency. Electric technology can just be so much more efficient. So to give you an example, typical gas furnace, the most efficient furnace you could buy today is probably 90% efficiency. And something like a heat pump, which is an electric technology, which simply moves heat around. Everybody has a heat pump today. It's your refrigerator, right? It moves heat from inside to out, rejects the heat. Those can go up to 250% efficiency. So it's just a game changer in terms of how efficient we can all be. And I think to connect back to what Tonyisha was saying, people fundamentally get that, right? If you explain that concept to them, like, hey, you can be 2.5 times as efficient with this technology, it's going to save you money. People are totally on board with that, right? So we have to keep it simple, and we have to keep it consistent in terms of the messaging that we're sharing.
Thank you. And, as we start to wrap up our conversation and, thank everyone for joining us, there was some mention of some of the imperfections in the process of manufacturing solar panels, in disposal as well. But, clearly it beats coal. And as we talk with other experts and lay people and people who just care about the earth, we're starting to understand that many of our intractable problems can be addressed with the clean energy economy. And that was something that Jonathan Scott's Power Hour expressed very well with us. So all of you, brief response, what changes do you see in solar and other renewables or accelerators or other things? What should people at home be looking for? And also, what choices can they make personally to make a difference? Margaret, I'm on you. I'm going to stick with you, and then I'll ask each of you the same thing.
Sure. So, I mean, I think, if you're a homeowner, which in Chicago, that's about 45% of folks. So not even half, not a majority. But if you own your home, think about the end of life of your equipment, right? Do you have an air conditioner? How many more years can you expect that to run? Same thing goes with your furnace. Start to explore your options and understand. When you get a contractor in your home, ask them about these technologies. There are existing programs. I mentioned Illinois Solar for All. ComEd and Ameren, the electric utilities in Illinois, both offer dynamic electricity rates. So you can actually pay the hourly price for electricity as opposed to a flat rate. You can save money and reduce carbon emissions. Get to know organizations. So Tonyisha mentioned, what are the community groups that are working on environmental justice, that are working on climate, that you can get tapped into. There are so many ways to get involved. So I would just encourage folks, find something that you're passionate about, understand who's working on it in your neighborhood, where you are, and just get involved.
Thank you, Margaret. I know, Tonyisha, let's see if you can answer. You may have to step away to close your window because of climate change, but what would you say about what's coming down the road and choices people can make? And we'll see if we have any audio issues.
I think people should start contacting their legislators and saying that they want to see more renewable energy options available, that they want to see it completely grid powered completely by renewable energy, and they want to protect things like net metering, community solar, and rooftop solar. I think that's the direction Illinois is already headed in, but it comes from, the message needs to come from the people and from Illinoisans, who are always more powerful than any lobbyist or money interests. So I see that happening in Illinois with a focus on environmental justice, because we always want to make sure that any type of environmental solution, any solution to climate change, which will be going to renewable and electrification, includes a plan that's equitable and accessible to everyone. We can no longer go back to leaving people behind.
Thank you. Not the way it's always been done. Erika, same thing. Solutions are things people can do.
I think Margaret and Tonyisha hit both of those kind of perspectives on absolutely on the head. And I would just, bring it to, grow your own food. That's like reducing the miles that food has to go from some other part of the world to our plates. Start composting, and in the spring of 22, we'll have a place where you can bring all your scraps, and we'll turn it into compressed natural gas, which is, as soon as the state has some incentivization and can help to support the electrification, we will take that gas and make electricity. The challenge is economic, and we have to all prioritize this work and get involved and take it as seriously as we all did with these current elections.
Thank you so much. It has been a fascinating conversation with 3 women that you can continue to learn more from with their organizations. That was Erika Allen of Urban Growers Collective, and also with the, what's the name in Urban Gresham? The
Green Era.
Green Era.
Always Growing Auburn Gresham Collaborative.
There you go. So look those guys up. Margaret Garascia from Elevate Energy. There's a website, lots of information and research there. And Tonyisha Harris with the Illinois Environmental Council, and also a member of the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition. On Monday, November 16th at 10 p.m. Central, you can watch this Jonathan Scott's Power Trip again. It was a fascinating look as someone's education, as he learned what's holding us back from clean energy and the obstacles to renewing or to having a future that will be healthier for all of us. And it's part of WTTW's tradition of bringing community dialogues around important social and cultural issues, and issues that impact communities where they need the most information. So we're glad that you were joining us. Thank you for tuning in. And I'm Sylvia Ewing, and I'm going to say goodbye. Thank you.